Welcome to 30 Minds. Pam Bondi interrupted Jasmine Crockett on live TV, expecting to silence her. What she didn't expect was a calm, fact-loaded response that flipped the entire room and the internet on its head. The lights were hot, the air in. The studio felt thick, like it always does when something bigger's about to happen, even if nobody says it out loud. It was a live broadcast, one of those panels where everyone talks over each other about politics, policy, and who's to blame. For what? But tonight had a different weight. The topic was criminal justice reform. The lineup was tense on paper and even tighter in person. On the left sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas, known for her sharp mind, bold voice, and a no-nonsense presence that didn't care for polished niceties. On the right, Attorney General Pam Bondi of Florida, a fixture in conservative legal circles and no stranger to headline-grabbing remarks. The network had hyped it all week. Two strong women, opposite views, national television. You could almost hear producers rubbing their hands. Backstage, Jasmine was calm. She always carried that sense of focus, the kind that makes people underestimate you because you're not raising your voice. Her team told her to expect heat, maybe even disrespect, but she didn't flinch. She'd dealt with worse in courtrooms and worse still in private. Bondi, on the other hand, wore confidence like armor. She came in smiling but stiff, like someone who knew the crowd wasn't hers but planned to win it anyway. She scanned the room like she was taking inventory, nodding to familiar faces on the sidelines. You could tell she was ready for a show, not a conversation. The segment started with a soft toss to Bondi, a question about recent sentencing disparities in Florida. She gave a rehearsed answer, polished and packaged for Middle America. She talked about law and order, individual responsibility, and a broken culture of leniency. Her words danced around the real issues without touching them. No one interrupted. Then it moved to Crockett. The moderator asked her thoughts on bias in the justice system. Crockett leaned slightly forward. Her voice was low, direct, thoughtful. She spoke about data, real numbers, how black defendants in the same counties received longer sentences than white defendants for the same crimes, how cash bail kept poor people behind bars while those with money walked free. She wasn't emotional. She didn't need to be. Facts were her fuel. Just as she was building to her point, Bondi cut in. "No disrespect, Congresswoman, but that's just not true," she said, waving her hand like she was brushing away a fly. "You're cherry-picking stats and ignoring the real causes of crime in our communities." The moderator tried to intervene, but it was too late. Bondi kept going. "People are tired of this narrative, tired of blaming the system. Maybe it's time we start talking about accountability." The studio fell quiet. Crockett's face didn't move. Not a blink, not a twitch. Viewers at home leaned in. Bondi smiled, probably thinking she'd landed a solid punch, but there was something in Crockett's stillness that hinted she wasn't shaken, just measuring. The moderator cleared her throat. "Let's allow Congresswoman Crockett to respond." That's when the real story started. But before we get to that, something in the room had already shifted. Jasmine adjusted her mic, not because it needed fixing, but because it bought her half a second, just enough time to gather her thoughts. Not that she needed much. She'd been here before. Not on this exact stage, maybe, but in rooms like this, rooms where people in power tried to paint her as emotional, irrational, unqualified. It never worked, but they always tried. She looked straight ahead, not at Bondi, not at the cameras. Her voice was calm, clipped. "Let me be very clear," she said. "What I said wasn't theory. It wasn't opinion. It came directly from Department of Justice data, sentencing project studies, court records. If we're going to have this conversation, we can't start by pretending reality doesn't exist." Pam Bondi blinked, maybe surprised that Jasmine didn't get defensive, maybe hoping she would. But Crockett wasn't here to swing wildly. She was here to land clean hits. You say people are tired of this narrative, Jasmine continued, but the only people who seem tired of it are the ones who never had to live it. There was a brief pause, the kind that doesn't happen often on TV, and then she went further. You talk about accountability? I'm all for accountability, she said. So let's start with the police departments that don't report use of force data, the prosecutors who push plea deals on innocent people to pad their conviction rates, the judges who sentence kids like adults because their zip code doesn't look like yours. Bondi shifted in her chair, her smile fading just a bit. But she wasn't backing down either. She interrupted again, sharper this time. With all due respect, Congresswoman, I've spent my career locking up criminals who destroy their own neighborhoods. If you want to talk about justice, start there. The words landed with weight, not because they were true, but because they were strategic. Blame the community. Make it about morality. Frame it like you're the adult in the room. It was a tactic, as old as politics. Jasmine didn't take the bait. What you just said is exactly the problem, she replied. You talk about locking people up, but you never talk about what they were locked out of before they ever broke the law. You focus on punishment, but you never mention prevention. You measure justice by jail cells, not by opportunities. Bondi tried to respond, but this time the moderator stepped in. Let's stay on topic, please. Too late. The audience, both in the studio and at home, had already picked up on the energy shift. Bondi came in trying to dominate. Crockett wasn't, playing defense. She was rewriting the rules, and she wasn't done. You can't fix a system if you refuse to admit it's broken, Jasmine said, turning to the camera now. And you definitely can't lead on justice if you think acknowledging racism is the same as being divisive. A few gasps, a few murmurs. You could see one of the producers behind the glass drop his pen. Bondi, for the first time, didn't speak. Her lips parted slightly like she was preparing to say something, but then didn't. This wasn't how it was supposed to go, but the thing is, Crockett never raised her voice, never broke her rhythm, and somehow that made everything she said land harder. She wasn't trying to go viral, she was trying to be heard, and the more she spoke, the more people started realizing how rare that is. How rare it is to see someone calmly call out power without apologizing for making the room uncomfortable. Because the truth is, some rooms need to be made uncomfortable before anything can change. But this wasn't the climax. This was just the warning shot. You could feel it, this subtle stillness in the studio that wasn't just about silence. It was that in-between moment when people are still processing what they just heard. Bondi had leaned back slightly in her chair. Her usual armor, the smooth delivery, the sharp interruptions, didn't feel as sharp now. She crossed her arms, then uncrossed them. She glanced off stage, probably at a producer or maybe a staffer. She was searching for something. Control, maybe. But it wasn't in the room anymore. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett sat motionless. She wasn't gloating, wasn't smirking. She knew better than to celebrate too early. These moments are slippery. One misstep, one misplaced tone, and the narrative shifts. She wasn't about to let that happen. Not tonight. The moderator, sensing tension that could either explode or evaporate, tried to redirect. Let's shift gears a little. Attorney General Bondi, how do you respond to critics who say your office has consistently resisted efforts to increase transparency in sentencing? Pam forced a quick smile. That's simply false, she said. Our office has been very open to reform. Real reform, not political grandstanding. But we're not going to sacrifice public safety for optics. It was a practiced answer, firm, clean. But the moment had already drifted from her. She could feel it. The audience didn't lean forward anymore when she spoke. They were waiting for the next thing Jasmine would say. Crockett didn't jump in. She waited, let Bondi finish, let the silence hang for a second. And then, softly, not accusing, not dramatic, she asked a question. What exactly do you mean by real reform? Bondi blinked. Well, for starters, we're supporting data sharing across jurisdictions. We've expanded our youth diversion programs, Jasmine cut in, politely but firmly. Programs your office only supported after public pressure, and 2 investigative reports. There it was again. A pinpointed correction. Crockett wasn't throwing haymakers, she was slicing, fact after fact, contradiction after contradiction. Bondi exhaled, not quite a sigh, but close. You know what I think, she said. I think people, like you, are more focused on the narrative than the solution. It was meant to flip the script, paint Crockett as the politician, the idealist, someone who talked a lot but didn't solve much. But Crockett had heard it all before. This idea that passion and intelligence can't live in the same sentence when it comes from someone like her. She smiled, not to be liked, but to signal that she saw the move coming. I care about the solution, she said. I just don't believe in solving the wrong problem. The moderator looked like he wanted to cut to commercial. The control room probably screamed into his earpiece. But he let it ride. The room was too real to pause. Then Jasmine shifted in her seat, just slightly forward like she was about to talk to the audience directly. You want to know what real reform looks like? It looks like a system where zip codes don't predict outcomes, where prosecutors don't treat public defenders like speed bumps, where a public defender doesn't carry a caseload of 150 people and still sleeps at night wondering who they failed. She paused. Where judges can't justify longer sentences because someone looks like they'll reoffend, when all they're really doing is judging fear, not facts. Now the audience was still again, not out of awkwardness this time, but attention. Pam opened her mouth but stopped. Maybe she knew it was time to regroup. Maybe she didn't have a clean rebuttal lined up. The moderator, clearly watching the clock, tried to pivot again. Let's move to community policing. But before he could finish the sentence, Jasmine held up a hand, not to interrupt, but to finish, a thought. And real reform, she added, means you don't silence the people closest to the problem just because they make you uncomfortable. It wasn't a mic drop. She wasn't performing. She was laying track, quietly building to something stronger. But what came next wasn't just clarity. It was confrontation. Jasmine let the pause stretch just a second longer than expected, long enough for the weight of her last sentence to settle. Then she turned, not toward the moderator this time, but toward Pam Bondi directly. Not with anger, not with mockery, just intent, like someone who'd grown tired of walking around the edges of truth. You know, Jasmine said, there's something personal in the way you speak about communities like mine. Bondi's expression hardened. She wasn't used to being addressed this directly, not on air, not like this. You keep referring to neighborhoods. Destroyed by crime, Jasmine continued, but never once have you acknowledged what created those conditions to begin with. Redlining, underfunded schools, over-policing, predatory lending. You want to talk about law and order but skip the history that broke the order in the first place. The moderator sat back. This wasn't the kind of segment he was used to managing. He looked at the producer again, but no one cut the feed. Pam leaned forward, her voice tightening. I've spent years working with law enforcement to bring down crime rates. I'm not here to get lectured about ancient policies that have nothing to do with today's problems. Jasmine blinked. Her voice was lower now, measured. You think redlining is ancient? She said. The last active redlined loan maps weren't phased out until the late 80s. You think systemic bias is old news? Your own office opposed a data collection bill on racial disparities in traffic stops last year. That caught Bondi off guard. She sat back. Her jaw moved slightly like she was searching for a rebuttal. You called it bureaucratic overreach, Jasmine added, but let me translate that for the people watching at home. You didn't want to look. The studio air changed again. Viewers watching from places like Toledo, Fresno, Shreveport, and Worcester were glued to their screens now. not for spectacle, but for something rarer, directness without drama. Bondi tried one more time. I stand by the work my office has done to keep families safe. Jasmine didn't flinch. You think safety only means more prisons, she replied. I think safety means a parent doesn't have to choose between paying rent and posting bail. Safety means a teenager doesn't have to grow up thinking a routine stop could turn deadly. Safety means justice doesn't look different depending on what you can afford. Pam's face was still, maybe realizing now that every word she said was becoming part of a narrative she didn't control. Jasmine leaned back in her chair. I've sat with mothers who never got a call back after their son was arrested. I've worked on cases where evidence sat on a desk because the defendant had no lawyer to push the system forward. You don't see that from your office. You only see numbers, charts, crime rates. There was no shouting, no finger-pointing, just a steady, rhythmic stream of truth wrapped in real-life stories that couldn't be brushed aside. The camera cut to Bondi. She glanced down at her notes, then up. Her voice had softened, almost unsure. Well, I think we both want the same thing, she said. Safer communities, stronger institutions. Jasmine didn't let her off the hook. Wanting. The same thing doesn't mean we're doing the same work, she said. Intentions are fine, but what matters is impact. That landed hard. A beat passed. Even those in the audience who'd come in skeptical weren't checking their watches. They were watching a woman push through the noise, the interruptions, the polished political gloss, and speak with something harder to challenge. Lived experience paired with receipts. And Jasmine had more. Do you remember the case of Alonzo Brewer? She asked. Pam hesitated. You should. He spent 12 months in pretrial detention because he couldn't afford bond. Your prosecutors pushed for max sentencing on a minor possession charge. His public defender filed 5 motions to expedite the case. No response. Pam looked confused, maybe trying to remember if someone had prepped her on this. He took a plea. Deal, Jasmine added. Didn't even know he had a legal right to see the body cam footage. The audience was silent. Bondi's face tightened. That was your office, Jasmine said. That was your policy. But Crockett wasn't trying to embarrass her. She was trying to make a point, loud enough that no one could ignore it. There are moments when the air in a room feels different. Not tense, not calm, just uncertain. And this was one of those. For the first time in the entire broadcast, Pam Bondi didn't know what to say. She sat back in her chair, her fingers lightly tapping the stack of notes in front of her. The notes didn't matter anymore. The talking points she'd rehearsed with her staff were miles away from the ground she now stood on. The name Alonzo Brewer had done something. It wasn't just a case, it was a face, a real one, a story with blood, time, and mistakes tied to her office. Bondi wasn't used to people bringing those stories into public airspace like this. Not without warning, and certainly not with cameras rolling across from her. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't speak. She sat quiet, calm, composed, her hands folded in her lap. She knew the weight had shifted. The moderator, sensing the tension, leaned in with a cautious voice. Attorney General Bondi, would you like to respond? Pam cleared her throat. Her usual confidence hadn't returned yet. I'm not familiar with that specific case, she said, trying to regain some ground. But I'll be sure to look into it. Jasmine raised one eyebrow, not in judgment, but in disbelief. He wrote your office 4 times, she said. His sister called your desk personally twice. His file sat untouched for 3 months before it even got logged into the system. Bondi glanced off camera. She was trying to steady herself, but Crockett wasn't swinging wild punches. She was pressing with clean, undeniable facts, and people were watching. Across the country, social media lit up like a pinball machine. Clips of the exchange were already being posted with captions like, "She came with the files. This is what accountability looks like. Bondi just got publicly briefed on her own office." but inside that studio, no one said a word. Pam tried. One more pivot. "I take these matters seriously," she said, "and I understand that justice isn't always perfect. But I also know that we need to support our prosecutors and law enforcement officers who work hard under difficult conditions." It wasn't a bad answer. It just wasn't the right one for the moment. Jasmine leaned forward again, voice softer now. "And I know good officers, too," she said. "I've stood next to them. But when we talk about justice, it can't just be about defending the system. It has to be about fixing it when it fails." There was a pause. Then Crockett added something that caught everyone off guard. "I don't want to fight you," she said. "I want to work with you. But I can't do that if your first instinct is to dismiss the realities I've spent my life trying to change." Pam didn't speak. Maybe she didn't know how to respond. Maybe she knew there wasn't a clean answer, and for once that silence said more than words ever could. In the control room, the director made the call to stay with the shot. No cutaways, no split screen, just two women facing off, one grounded in power, the other grounded in lived experience, and both forced to reckon with the weight of what had just happened. The segment was only supposed to last 15 minutes, but it had gone far past that now, and nobody wanted it to stop. The moderator looked like he had about 100 questions, but instead he simply said, "We'll take a quick break and return in a moment." The screen faded to black, and in living rooms, waiting rooms, break rooms, and barbershops across the country, people were already picking sides. But no one could deny it. Something had shifted in that room, and it was bigger than either of them. The segment ended, but the conversation didn't. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were everywhere. Sliced, shared, dissected. People weren't just watching the video. They were watching it again, slowing it down, rewinding Jasmine Crockett's response to Bondi's interruption, reposting the exact moment Bondi's expression shifted when the name Alonzo Brewer came up. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was a mirror, a flash of clarity in a country exhausted from noise and distractions. Here was a woman, black, bold, relentless, walking into a room designed to shrink her and refusing to do so. Not with volume, not with anger, with truth. Crockett didn't check her phone right away after the taping. She stayed in the green room with her chief of staff, who was sitting across from her, just quietly shaking her head. "You knew she'd come for you," her staffer said. "I was counting on it," Jasmine replied. She didn't say much else. She never did after interviews. Her habit was to sit still for a bit, like someone coming down from a long sprint. Her thoughts never scattered. They simply needed time to cool. Bondi left the studio quickly. She didn't wait for follow-ups or do the backstage small talk most guests do after a big panel. Her aides walked fast, heads down. Her comms director was already drafting a statement. Something neutral, something safe. But the truth is, no statement was going to shift what had just aired. People had seen too much. At a diner outside of Columbus, Ohio, two women in their 60s watched the rerun on a mounted screen above the counter. One said, "She didn't even yell. She just laid it out like a case file." The other sipped her coffee, then replied, "That's how you know she was right." Meanwhile, in a community center in Bakersfield, a group of teenagers sat with their youth mentor, rewatching the clip on a laptop. "She's the kind of leader I want to be," one girl whispered. On cable news that night, the panel was broken down from every angle. Some hosts called Crockett a force to watch. Others criticized her for being confrontational. But even critics had to admit she didn't just hold her ground. She took the ground and redrew the map. By morning, she was trending, not because of theatrics, but because of something rarer: substance. One user wrote, "It's not often someone gets attacked on live TV and walks out looking like the adult in the room." Jasmine Crockett didn't clap back. She taught a master class. She didn't respond to the attention right away. Her first post that day was just one sentence: Facts are not attacks. Simple, direct, just like her. Later that week, she held a town hall in San Bernardino. No frills, folding chairs, no stage, just people. She listened more than she spoke. When someone asked her what it felt like to confront someone like Pam Bondi on national television, she said it wasn't about confrontation. It was about correction. Some things just can't go unchecked anymore. The room was quiet. People nodded, and they understood. Because whether you agreed with her or not, it was hard to argue with what she stood for. Accountability without fear, truth without performance, grace under pressure, and most of all, knowing when to speak and when to let silence finish the work. But there was still one thing left to say, and it mattered more than all the rest. A few days had passed since the broadcast, but the conversation hadn't died down. If anything, it had deepened. What happened on that stage wasn't just a clash between two public figures. It was a moment that peeled back the layers of how public trust is earned and how easily it can be shaken. Jasmine Crockett knew this. That's why she didn't bask in the attention. She stayed on her schedule. Committee meetings, field visits, private, calls with families dealing with the very legal system she criticized on air. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was chasing outcomes. Still, the clip kept spreading. More than 4 million views on one channel alone, hundreds of thousands of comments, some hostile, some emotional, most thoughtful. A surprising number came from people who admitted they didn't agree with her politics but respected how she carried herself. One veteran from Flagstaff wrote, "I came in thinking she was another angry politician. I left realizing she was the only one who came with facts instead of fireworks." But Jasmine didn't need praise. She needed people to remember the truth behind the moment, the names, the cases, the systems that grind people down every single day while the world debates theory. So when she gave a talk at Southern University the following week, she took a different tone. More intimate, less fire, more focus. "We have to stop acting like justice is a one-size-fits-all promise," she told the students, because for too many folks in this country, that promise was never meant to fit them in the first place. She looked around the room. It's not enough to say the right thing on camera. It's what you fight for when nobody's looking that counts. That's what stuck. This wasn't about a takedown or winning a viral exchange. Jasmine Crockett had done something harder. She showed what it looks like to stay composed when someone tries to shrink you, and she showed the cost of that composure, the years it takes to build it, the pain that sharpens it, the stories you carry that never make the news but live in your bloodstream anyway. Pam Bondi never issued a direct response. A press release came and went, something about miscommunication and the importance of respectful dialogue. But by then, the public had already decided whose voice echoed loudest. Because when someone comes at you with interruption and disrespect, it's easy to snap back. But it's something else entirely to hold your ground with facts, patience, and that kind of calm that rattles people because it won't be moved. And that's what Jasmine gave people. Not just a moment to clap for, but a blueprint, a way forward. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that power doesn't always speak the loudest. Sometimes it speaks in questions that make people uncomfortable, in names that would have been forgotten, in silences that follow hard truths. So if you ever find yourself doubted, interrupted, or underestimated, remember this. Preparation beats provocation. And when you walk into a room ready not to argue but to correct, you don't need to shout. You just need to speak, and let the facts do the rest. If you found this story worth your time, hit that subscribe button. We've got more real moments, more real people, and more stories that don't just pass through the news cycle. They stick.